I think I'm a special one.
Hello there guys, Daniel Childs back here again. Hope you're doing really well wherever you're watching and listening to this. I promised in my pretty despondent Brighton review we were going to have a good guest on, and hopefully despite the negativity around Chelsea, I think validly at the moment, I think it's the right time to seriously talk about the club, to seriously talk about what's going wrong, several kind of factors that are leading to that feeling of despondency amongst fans. And I don't think there's a better person to break this down with me than the returning Joe Tweedie. I've mentioned him before, several of his tweets on my shows, and I think he really gets to the heart of a lot of the issues. But one of my favourite ever guests, I remember we were just catching up before recording. The last time we spoke was pre-winning the Champions League in 21. So obviously, you don't speak to someone for like 2 weeks in Chelsea world, mad stuff happens. If you don't speak to them for like 3 or 4 years on a podcast, I mean, change of ownership, mediocrity, all of that stuff. So, Joe, thank you so much for taking the time, and hopefully it'll be a good chat even in these difficult moments to be a Chelsea fan.
Yeah, thanks for having me back, Daniel. And yeah, I think it's right in saying when the last time we spoke, markedly different circumstances. I think it was probably approaching a Champions League window, potentially Rossi in terms of winning, so quite slightly different circumstances today. But yeah, definitely looking forward to getting into the topics and having a chat on obviously where the club is currently sort of is, where it's trending, and just the last sort of 2 years of this Blueco Clearlake ownership as well.
Yeah, I know you posted on X on Saturday that we're going to be doing the podcast and just asking for any topics, and thanks to everyone who responded. I know we got a lot of detailed questions, so Joe has kindly basically broken it down into 6 kind of general points that we're going to delve into on the show, which is tactics and style of play, squad building and recruitment, then looking at the ownership, the board and strategy of the club, sporting directors, club decision making, Maresca, looking at that, and then finally the fan experience and mentality. So we'll go through one by one because there's so much, and it's, you know, I think if we didn't have a structure, we'd be stuck on one of these points for about 2 hours. So to try and keep things a little bit more streamlined, we've gone in sort of this way. So I'll start, Joe, with the first one. So tactics and style of play. Jamal, Sean, Mehdi were several of the people who kind of asked this style of question in regards to the style of play, and effectively what tactical adjustments should Chelsea make under Maresca? Would a return to transitional football lead to success? And is his current approach sustainable for long-term dominance?
Yeah, I think this is probably the right starting point for this conversation. I mean, it is ultimately, it's the product on the pitch that I think the majority of people will care about, and we can obviously get into the rest of the kind of cascading issues that ultimately affect that for the time being. But I think it's probably fair to say that with Maresca coming in, the approach that he had at Leicester, I guess second half of their championship campaign in particular, was markedly different to the first there. And you know, teams, particularly in the Prem, particularly, you know, Championship, sort of really high-level professional teams now, the adaptation that they have towards tactics, towards any kind of particular trends is quite quick. It's maybe 10 games, 15 games. You know, you'd even look into Conte's second season at Chelsea, sort of the back reformation, what teams were starting to do to counter that in the second year that he was here versus the first year. I think it's fair to say that we've kind of, I think unfortunately with Maresca, landed on a coach who has jumped onto this kind of tail end, kind of Guardiola style coaching system, obviously coming through him at City, and you're going to pick up those principles. But the tail end of its sort of efficacy and the, you know, how I think dominant it has been potentially for really top level elite teams over the past number of years. I think the interesting thing for me is if you try to decouple that from player quality, I think the actual results are a little bit more like Russell Martin at Southampton than they are with Pep at City, but probably a slightly different question for another day there. But you know, Maresca has come in with a very defined kind of JDP sort of positional play style, and then clearly has jumped on this, you know, kind of verting fullbacks trend and sort of these rotations and movements that you would have seen with City. Now, I don't know if there has been a shorter-lived tactical trend than inverting fullbacks. I mean, it won't be, I guess, you know, in terms of the absolute epitome of irony, you think Guardiola spent the better part of a decade perfecting this, you know, Barcelona-esque style of football, bringing it through at City, at Bayern, etc., to then, against us, and essentially the first goal at Newcastle, literally hoofing it long and scoring off of two, you know, off a number of long balls. So, you know, whether he has been this kind of villainous genius that he's convinced everybody that there's one way of playing football and has now gone back to playing essentially Wimbledon from the 90s is quite is quite interesting. But, football moves in cycles, trends come and go. But the Brighton fixtures in particular, I think the question that I'll ask people, particularly those who are very pro-Maresca or think that they have, a view of football that is very tactical, etc. Like, what is the purpose of this inversion of fullbacks at the moment for this particular Chelsea team? We aren't particularly defensively solid with Cucurella or Gusto stepping into those areas. We aren't particularly fluid in terms of attacking movements, patterns, rotations, etc. We are struggling to progress the ball through the thirds. We seem to have this ability to just retain incredibly stagnant possession around the middle of the field or between the centre-backs. There isn't really any kind of outlet there. And I think the way that I've always framed football, Daniel, in terms of looking at things simply, is it's horizontal and vertical in terms of how you generate space. You either, you play with width, you stick guys on the touchline, you boots on the, literally on the touchline in terms of trying to generate width there. You stretch teams, they bring their fullbacks out, they create spaces between the back four, it creates spaces between the midfield horizontally. That theoretically, for your passes in midfield and your forwards, it creates pockets of spaces, and it literally gives you that ability to sort of actually get into sort of dangerous areas and create stuff. Similar vertically, if you've got guys who are, let's say, a Mohamed Salah or somebody like that of that particular ilk, or just anybody who wants to run in behind, even a centre forward, when you start stretching teams vertically, if they want to defend on the halfway line or defend really, really high and press up, that soon changes after they've been caught 3 or 4 times with very, very simple passes over the top into channels or behind. So all of a sudden they are naturally dropping 10, 15, 20 metres deeper to counter the fact that you've got 3 very pacey guys who want to get in behind and want to finish. And therefore, again, in terms of stretching the pitch, that vertical, kind of that verticality you're looking for, you're stretching teams again, you're creating bigger spaces between the midfield and the back four, etc., etc. Very, very, very simple concepts in football. You stretch teams horizontally, you stretch teams vertically, you create space for your better players, you exploit the space. It is not a rocket science in terms of the way we're sort of progressing. And you look at the way that this Chelsea team is currently sort of being deployed. You have Cucurella playing as a number 10. You've got Malo Gusto, whose form has fallen off an absolute cliff, in terms of this kind of tactical framework, playing as a number 10. You've got Cole Palmer dropping into a traditional kind of right back spot to pick up possession. It's all the wrong players in all the wrong areas. And for all the fullbacks who are listening to this podcast, or ex-fullbacks, the reason more often than not that these guys play out as a fullback is they're either failed central midfielders or, it's a position that they've ended up in. I think, Jamie Carragher once said nobody wants to be a Gary Neville when they're growing up. Nobody wants to be a fullback.
Yeah.
The fact that we've now given these guys this kind of central role in possession, in attack, Gusto was a central midfielder coming through at Lyon's academy. He got shifted to right back because he wasn't deemed good enough at their academy level to be in midfield. And yet, at the professional level, we're now asking him to step in and act as sort of this kind of quasi central midfield number 10 sort of hybrid, and we're completely compressing all of the space. You then look at all of the front three options we have at the moment. Every single player, it's back to goal. They want to receive the ball in pockets. They want to receive the ball with back to goal, ball to feet. Nobody wants to go in behind. So you've got potentially three forwards playing 10, 15, yards in front of a back four, trying to drop deep to pick up possession. You've got 2 fullbacks who are stepping incredibly, internally in terms of the field, maybe 10, 15, 20 metres inside the touchline. You've got Palmer and Nkunku or whoever standing, on their toes essentially. And then you've got the position of Enzo and Caicedo, just not really knowing then where is the space, where are they meant to stand? You look at sometimes on the pitch, left-hand side, right-hand side, you have a mixture of 3 players standing within what feels like, 5 metres of one another, with virtually zero ability to progress the ball anywhere apart from shifting it backwards left and then up the other flank and repeating the same thing here. So I think we've kind of reached the point now, and from a tactical perspective, where the things that Maresca is trying to do or asking the players to do is not conducive to us winning football matches. And there has to be, I think, a reflection now from him and his coaching staff that we need to look at trying something different. And as I say, again, whether that is stopping the inverted fullback thing, using those guys for width, whether that is looking at different ways of trying to sort of progress the ball through the middle in terms of giving the number 10s the actual number 10 space back in the team. But we're going to find an awful lot of problems now moving forward, because virtually every forward we have now wants ball to feet, doesn't want to go in behind. And probably the one player who maybe would want to do that, Neto, is so, he's not a particularly clinical player in terms of finishing. 2 league goals this season kind of is reflective of him in those areas. And even then, he is somebody, again, that wants ball to feet despite the electric pace that he does have. So you've got the mentality of the attackers, which is all back to goal, ball to feet, number 10 style. Midfielders, two central midfielders who, realistically, from what we've seen in this season, they're not going to influence the game in the final third in the way that we've maybe traditionally expected some Chelsea players to historically. And then we've got two fullbacks standing in the number 10 positions who don't have the skill set to play there. So what is the alternative? It is, as I say, I think looking at just trying to use the width. If you're going to stretch the team, it's not going to be over the top. I think we can sort of say that we don't have the pace, or at least the players with the skill set that want to go in behind. So is it then using Cucurella as the widest player on the left and Gusto as the widest player on the right and trying to stretch teams, and then using those two little pockets of space that will create sort of, in that kind of, channels either side of the penalty area D for the two number 10s to kind of work in, give them a bit more space, a little bit more freedom, give them a wide option to pass the ball to. But yeah, we're just sort of landing in this position where it is incredibly compressed, incredibly compact. So that my take is look at width. I think width is the only thing really that you'll be able to do with this team. But that being said, it's going to take an enormous amount of rework and rethink from Maresca, because every single thing that his coaches seem to do is to create this kind of central overload, which at the moment is causing more confusion and more inability for us to actually utilise space than it's actually generating anything positive. So I'm hoping that the Brighton games are going to be a bit of a catalyst for change, but I'm not entirely sure we'll see that moving forward. But it absolutely is required for us to start sort of picking up momentum in games and moving away from this stale and stagnant possession style, which at the moment, the two Brighton games has generated one shot on target in 180 minutes of football.
Yeah, I agree with so much of that. I think I look back to the summer when John McKenzie of Tifo, someone who I respect his work a lot, and he was asked about Maresca at Chelsea, and obviously this was during a period when there was a lot more scrutiny on Chelsea's transfer business, and always it going to be a complete mess with Maresca. And the thing he said, I think that you've just kind of demonstrated with the kind of flawed approach of this style of players. He was like, is Maresca going to put these principles in and kind of it looks like a facade, basically, a costume of what a Guardiola style of football is going to be, to affect, not verbatim exactly what he said, but he'll put in the things that make it look like this style of football. Whether it actually succeeds or not is kind of irrelevant, but it will look kind of right. Or is he actually going to be an impactful coach who is able to not only have those principles but make them work and make Chelsea a better team? And I think it's so reflective of this problem, right, that I think as a lot of people pointed out, I just found it very revealing that in the first block of the season, when Chelsea did a lot better than anyone anticipated, I felt we were playing a style of football that was basically everything except what was advertised for Enzo Maresca, and I thought that was a good thing. And it's hard to look at what's happened since the Everton game, basically, when Maresca in the media, whether you take what he says at face value or not, where he's talking about how the team's developing, it's getting better, they're playing in the way I want them to, and obviously in front of our eyes, undeniably, Chelsea have got significantly worse week by week in terms of their ability to create chances, finish chances, defend. All of the metrics, have gone down steeply over the Christmas and winter period. I sort of just look at that as, is Maresca a good enough coach to turn this round? Because I wonder if this is what he kind of deems football to be. I think, based on even some of the quotes in pre-season, he strikes me as kind of a technocrat. He strikes me as someone who I think believes that tactics can kind of solve everything. Which I'm not saying they bear no relevance. Obviously, they bear a lot of relevance in the game, but I'm not sure there's the other side to his coaching and management that can revive this season. I know obviously at the moment we're talking about tactics, but I think one of the things I've come to realize over recent years, and whenever I listen to people who've worked in the game or ex-players, is how much of it is psychological, how much of it is mentality. And I think maybe there's a problem there, that as a coach, he doesn't only have tactical issues. It's also maybe just an approach problem to get the best out of his players. I don't know whether you think that's a relevant criticism as well.
Yeah, I think one of the things, and I've been speaking probably over the last maybe week or so, 2 weeks, just to kind of validate some of the criticisms or take some different viewpoints from people that are working within the game professionally. And I think the main feedback that I'm getting is around sort of this overcoaching of players, and Gusto probably is the prime example here in terms of somebody who has a very, I think, natural and attacking kind of nature from right back. And the thing that I typically look at, particularly if somebody's performance is regressing quite considerably, but the entire team is also looking at particular nature, is that, essentially, are they just executing perfectly or, or poorly as it may be, what the coach is asking them. So, when you look at him charge forward, turn around and smash the ball back 70 yards to a centre-back like over and over and over and over again, and not try and get a cross in, not try and beat his man, not try and sort of get into a sort of dangerous area near the byline, is that his sort of take on the situation and his decision making, is that by the design of the team? And I think the point that and certainly I'm picking up on in terms of what you're saying there, is this kind of nature of positional play and how kind of overcoached certain players are. You're sort of removing the natural instincts, the decision-making skills that these guys have built up over like a really long period of their career. And Gusto probably, as I say, is the best example. There are a number of other players as well. I think a lot of our centre-backs sometimes, when we're looking at their turnovers, or you think, why have you made that decision to try and play that pass? More often than not, it's because that is kind of what they're being asked to do. If we're making mistakes and similar mistakes, game to game to game, a lot of that isn't purely down to just the players' like an inability to execute. They are just being asked repeatedly to do things that are either outside of their skill set because they're incredibly difficult things to execute regularly at a high level, or it is a part of the build-up framework that is being put into the team there. So I think my concern, and I say this about a lot of teams, you can see with Pochettino, and this isn't sort of a revisionist perspective, but over the course of the season, the team improved. Like the last 15 games of the season, again, wasn't perfect. Doesn't mean to say that I'm saying that he should have been here, etc. It's just it's a perspective, and I think one that holds true to any sort of measurement, is that we definitely improved. That last 15 games of the season, we started to look like a decent football team, and it took him an awful long period of time to get the team up and running, to get them fit, to get them, as a team, and I guess in terms of sort of the maturity that it takes to be selfless in terms of running, in terms of off the ball, in terms of, attacking phases, defensive phases, all of this sort of stuff that we were seeing in the last 10, 15 games, particularly in the league. That to me is evidence that a coach is improving players around them, is making the team better in terms of the constructs, in terms of that they're buying into what he's doing. I think the converse and sort of, almost the inverse of what we've seen of that with Maresca, is that the longer that he has been coaching individual players and coaching the team collectively, I think the more stagnant, stale, and just the worse we look. Even, I said I'm not even digging into sort of advanced metrics here. I think it is, probably post Everton of last year, the performance levels and what we've actually been achieving has been actually quite poor overall. And then if you even remove the noise previously of sort of the Conference League just literally dunking on teams left, right and centre, like the results beyond that also extend are not particularly, kind of pleasant to look at. So when you have a coach who has come in with an incredibly young squad, is taking over a team that were starting to resemble something, as I say, not suggesting that we were title challengers or anything of that nature, but we were starting to show signs of actually being a collective at the end of last season, to take them into this season and to watch them play, particularly the last 4, 5, 6 performances. There are times where it looks like that this is the first time that these guys have ever kicked a football together in any sort of sense of the word. So that's my concern, Daniel, is that we are looking more and more like a team that is being overworked, overcoached, is having the individual kind of characteristics and some of the individual brilliance, and looking a little bit at Cole Palmer here, some of that individual brilliance and ability to shine is being removed by being placed in such a restrictive and in very many ways a very prescriptive, formulaic style of football, which I think, again, when we're looking at sort of the tactical framework, and I think you're right in saying beginning of the season, there were games, I think Villa, Newcastle, etc., which were a little bit more basketball end to end and a bit more chaotic, but we actually looked dangerous, we looked threatening. We may also have on the flip side looked like we were going to concede every 5 seconds in terms of the other team's countering, but we looked incredibly threatening. We were good going forward. There was lots of rotation, lots of movement. The team were playing particularly well, but the more that tactical framework has come in, the more it's sort of squeezed the life, I think, out of these players, and they may just need a change also, just for a little bit of a mental break. Being asked to do the same things over and over again. This very formulaic approach. When you receive the ball here, you do X, or like that. That way of controlling players can be incredibly sort of mentally diminishing over the course of a period of time, particularly when you're losing, particularly when the results aren't there. Players are going to start questioning, well, why am I being asked to do these sort of 3 actions every time I receive the ball? Why can't I just play what I'm seeing? And I think we're at that position now where you can see Cole Palmer on the touchline, rightfully or wrongfully, rightly or wrongly, gesticulating, being quite stroppy, quite outwardly on the pitch, throwing the arms up, etc., etc. If that is starting to happen to your best player, you've got to start looking at ways of addressing that. And I think that is going to be a little bit of looking at taking the handbrake off. And how we do that is, given the injuries we've got, given the personnel available, is a different question. But I think that they've got to try and free this group of players up for the next couple of months, because otherwise that ambition of finishing, well, I mean, the fans' ambition, I should say, rather than the club's ambition, but the fans' ambition of finishing in the Champions League places is going to be under threat if we continue down this path of prescriptive ABC formulaic football.
Absolutely. In terms of, so we'll move on to squad building and recruitment strategy next. It's another a question that includes the word rebuild. I've lost track of the amount of rebuilds we've had at this point. This is from Umar, Timpson, Bears, Freddie, the load of people who sent this type of question in. What should Chelsea's squad rebuild look like in the next transfer window? Can issues be solved with existing players? And what is the long-term plan for success?
Oh, this is a tough one here. I mean, beyond, as you say, I think the term rebuild is just, it's lost some kind of sense and meaning since the club have come in. How can you potentially be talking about a rebuild after the level of spend that we've had? So, yeah, okay, if we're looking at what do we need to do to sort of take the team forward, I think, unfortunately, we are still very much in a position where we need to look at the spine of the team, and I think in terms of like a little bit of let's say kind of a blueprint here, or like 7 points that I would probably be looking at to sort of go through. Rebuilding the spine is probably the number one thing for me. I'd be looking at getting some like powerful guys in, intelligent guys, leaders that are in key positions, a goalkeeper, a centre half, like an actual disciplined holding midfielder, a really kind of ruthless centre forward, just straight down the middle. Those would be sort of the 4 positions that I would be immediately targeting when it comes to recruitment. In terms of the profiles or the names, I'm not really sort of looked at anyone in particular for the time being, but I think we've got to start looking at, kind of historically, what has made Chelsea successful, where football is trending in terms of what we're seeing at the moment. And it's no real surprise that teams who have a simplified game model, a simplified approach to recruitment, this kind of tail end of kind of the Pep style of football that's been pervasive for the past 10, 15 years or whatever it is in terms of that time frame. If Russell Martin at Southampton wasn't a complete and utter, kind of shot across the bows of that style of football being the way to go moving forward, like you have to have basically one or two of the best players in world football in every single one of those positions to make it work. And as we know, even City have found that difficult with Rodri being out and sort of how they've looked this season. So, Forest have had great success, simplified recruitment, simplified game model. And I think for us, it's going back to basics. We have been a team who, I like the term counterculture when it comes to Chelsea. We were the, kind of disruptors coming in at first with obviously Abramovich's money, and all sort of the old kind of ancien regime, old guard kind of clubs were like massively frustrated with us and all the finger pointing, etc., etc. But we came in, we were playing this kind of very physical, aggressive style of football, and probably culminated really with that Ancelotti Chelsea team who had that perfect blend of power and technical players and with just absolute ruthless efficiency. And I think the other thing as well was that those teams were always adaptable, Daniel, and I think that's been the big concern now, is that we can only play one way, and that one way isn't conducive to Chelsea getting back to where they need to. So I would be having a little bit of a rethink around philosophy, direction. Like, there's no coincidence that Simeone has been at Atletico Madrid for like 3,000 years, playing generally kind of a very, very similar set of principles. Yep, they've changed and they've probably modernised, and they've probably become a little bit more attacking this season in terms of their approach as well. But loosely speaking, like, he has kept the same structure. Like, we want hard-working players, we want physical players, we want players who have great technique but have great desire and are intense, and all this sort of stuff that they have on the table. Like, that has worked forever. All of the other teams changing how they approach the game and how they kind of work around it, and all the different kind of models and all the different ways of playing. they have always been, Atletico have always been an incredibly good team in Spain and always a massive problem for teams in Europe. And I look at them as almost kind of really stealing that kind of early Mourinho blueprint that we had at Chelsea and just taking it and riding it to the death. So I would be looking at, let's revisit kind of the principles that made us a fantastic team. I think looking at where football is trending, that it's trending back to those physical talents, those players that have, multiple kind of skill sets, that you aren't just a midfielder who's expected to shuffle the ball around and then pass it to a forward and then return to your position and stand there until the next kind of phase of build up again. Like, let's get somebody in midfield who can score some goals. That maybe, obviously answering one of the questions here is looking at somebody like Andre Santos, and I'll probably talk a little bit more about him in a second. But look at where football is trending. Look at getting back in those kind of physical specimens, those guys that could play, those guys that were intimidating. I was listening to a podcast excerpt from Paddy Kenny, like Sheffield United, QPR's old goalkeeper. And, he was saying before the game against Chelsea, like the famous one where I think we got, I think we might have been beat by them like 2-1 and we got 9 men or whatever it was, or he was talking about the team in 2010. He was talking about Chelsea sides, kind of through the ages. And he was said that he would look to sort of the team and he'd see like Ballack, Terry, Ivanovic, like Mikel, Essen, like this absolute team of units. And it was intimidating. He was like, they just looked enormous. They looked imposing. They looked terrifying in the tunnel. And as much as people want to talk about, kind of small technical players, etc., they don't really, unless you're Messi, inspire an enormous amount of fear in opposition. So, revisiting the way that we look at players, get a goalkeeper in who is actually a good goalkeeper. I don't really care if you can ping the ball like David Beckham, from between the sticks. Like, that to me is not the measurement of a goalkeeper. Like, I would much prefer him just to launch the ball up the pitch and let's just play from there. Yes, it's all about build up and this, that, the other. But when you are conceding shots and you're conceding turnovers and you're putting your 3 worst players in terms of technical ability under pressure, your 2 centre-backs and your goalkeeper under pressure every single time you play out from the back, it's an insane way to play. And again, I think looking at centre-back, like someone physical, someone imposing, Van Dijk is the perfect reference point for modern football. Yes, he can play. Yes, he's decent enough in possession. He's a great technical player. But Van Dijk is an intimidating physical unit who, is scary for people to play against. He's one of the biggest reasons that Liverpool have been so successful is his physical profile at the back. And if you're ever going to try and get something out of Levi Colwill in terms of seeing where his potential is going to be, he has to be playing alongside somebody who is more experienced, who is a better player, who is actually going to be able to give him that sort of leadership and guidance during a game. Because otherwise, you're never going to see what Colwill is going to be. Is he going to be a player that makes that makes mistakes and isn't quite physical enough at the moment, it seems, in terms of the way that he's playing, or does he just need, like John Terry needed in the early part of his career, a Desai, a Leboeuf, a player of that kind of skill set and stature and experience next to him to start coaching him through and start giving him some of that wisdom in games. And it's the same in midfield again. I've been very vocal about being critical of Caicedo and Enzo Fernandez, but again, I think both of them probably Caicedo in my own analysis here typecast a little bit too much as a standard number 6 here. We need and have needed probably since Matic left Chelsea that physically dominant big central midfield presence that can screen the back four, that will give them better protection, and then lets Caicedo and go and hunt and do that sort of Kante role and be a bit more aggressive. I think we've missed that kind of physical profile in midfield, and it's similar up front as well. We don't have to have a Didier Drogba or Diego Costa clone. I think again I would love to have a 22-year-old Drogba or Costa up front leading the line here, but again somebody who is a bit of a presence, somebody who is ruthless, somebody who is a finisher. If they're a bit of a shit house as well, like obviously that's all going to kind of go into the Chelsea mentality, but getting that central kind of starting pillar of the team, that spine of the team, spot on in terms of profile, in terms of personality, in terms of skill set. Like, the biggest criticism of the recruitment has been that we have spent that enormous amount of money and we still need those players, going into the 3rd year of this rebuild. And, the only player that I can see on loan currently that sort of has that sort of profile is probably Andre Santos, just in terms of as a partner for Caicedo. This is a guy that can pop up with goals. He's good defensively. He's got a great engine. He reminds me a little bit of like an Arturo Vidal kind of midfielder. That sort of, he's got technique. He's just a really, really all-round fantastic player. That kind of multifunctional Swiss Army knife midfielder that we've probably missed. Plus, he's aggressive. He's a physical player. He's playing well in France, which is always for me a good indicator of somebody being able to handle the the physicality and the pace of the Premier League as well. So he's probably the guy on loan that I'm looking at that will be able to come back and maybe sort of give us some ability. Then probably Ugochukwu. I've remained very, very high on him. I think he's in a really, really terrible Southampton team, but he seems to play well when he comes on. He's got that physical profile as well, and maybe in a better team with a more defined structure, that those two are the ones that I'd be looking at to give us that little bit of ability to come in there. So if we're looking at buys, goalkeeper, centre half, and a forward, it could be a striker, it might be a winger that scores goals. But those would be the three profiles that I'd be looking at. And as I say, it's a little bit of a rethink and a rebrand of where we're heading. I think this kind of Potter, experiment, we brought Maresca in to kind of continue it in terms of that style of play. I just think that it's dying a death now, and we either need to be ahead of the trend or get on the trend that's coming. And that to me looks like it's going to be, centre forwards like Isak at Newcastle, like tall, athletic player. You're not going to find a Haaland potentially because he's just looks like he's been made in a lab somewhere. But tall, physical players that can get around the pitch, players that play with intensity, players that can play with aggression, and players that actually, when they leave the pitch, you can see that they've given absolutely everything. Admittedly, we had one in Conor Gallagher, but we probably won't open that can of worms for this podcast.
Yeah, there's probably there is a whole podcast probably on Conor Gallagher.
Yeah,
but,
so that's why we had.
I agree. I agree. In those first two parts, right, in terms of like Maresca's approach and the flaws of it and the recruitment, I think the thing that kind of hits home most when I think about this style of play and this approach in terms of recruitment and what it's led to is I think it's pseudo-intellectual. It's kind of the way I've framed it for quite a while now, is that, people, you're being told that this is a smarter, basically, style of football. And fans are watching. Southampton are the greatest example of this, but you could throw Spurs in this category. We've seen, obviously, Chelsea as well. And it's amazing. You watch, I would task anyone, just watch a weekend of English football. Watch the Premier League, watch League One, Championship, League Two. You will at least see, I bet you, about 5, 6, 7, 8 times when a goal is given away because the goalkeeper stupidly passes the ball into an area that he doesn't need to, and a goal is cheaply given away for no reason. And I don't believe, and I think people, the backlash against this, I think, started last season, but I think it's really come to the fore, seeing how just absolutely horrendous Southampton were, right? One of the worst Premier League teams we've ever seen. And it very much felt like it wasn't the case that they just weren't good enough. It was that they were playing a style of football that was making them look as shambolic as they were. And I do agree with you that this kind of turn against this is starting to come now, because I think, you see how impactful Forest have been. But I was thinking when you were talking there, I was looking at the squad. Yeah, I agree with you 100%. The goalkeeping situation is a farce. It has been. We need a more commanding centre-back. Midfield needs absolute improvement. Striker too. But I just look at the tools that are already there that were kind of evidenced by our decent start to this season. When you saw how this team, when it does play a more transitional game, how it can be impactful, how it can be dangerous. Not perfect, but how it can be an effective team. And you kind of look at it and again go, I feel like my intelligence is being insulted. And I think as we turn on to above Enzo Maresca here, where I can't believe that we can't play this style of football, even with the players we've got currently. I think with the current group of players, as we saw last year of Pochettino, it actually does suit them, because we do have pace in the team. It's not like there's absolutely no pace in the team. There are a few players you can pick out and go that there's speed there. Enzo Fernandez, I think, always looks like a better footballer to me and a more impactful midfielder when he gets the ball and he's turning and he's passing into space, rather than in this kind of very slow, repetitive build-up. He's not good enough to be a Fabregas where he's going to pick a pass out of nowhere that no one else can see. But of course, when there's space in front of him, he can sometimes make a really smart pass that's impactful. I think it's the same for Cole Palmer. So I agree with you that the turn needs to happen, but